interest in those kind of combinations. So I'll let Libby tell you a little bit about what she does as well.
So I study peninsular Spain and European literature, more contemporary literature. And at the moment, I'm really interested in this idea of the border and what it means in the Mediterranean in particular for people to be moving from one land to another, to cross and to be new participants, new creators of literature and art in a different cultural context. It's particularly interested in Spain because what's happening in Spain is a lot of people are coming from North Africa. So we're seeing a really interesting mixture of new North African culture coming into Spain, which is in fact not historically not all that new, because the North African people were a major part of peninsular culture in the 16th century. So you have this kind of movement across boundaries, across time, that I find fascinating at the moment. So that gives you some idea of what we're studying. I can say we do other things in Complit. We're really excited by the interest that I think we're in our third graduating class, so this is a new major, but the interest has been really kind of overwhelming. And last year, for the first time, we had a translation symposium, which was just a tremendous amount of fun. And what we did is ask students to, in all languages, so this went all across languages, to propose a short piece, so to submit the original language and then the translation. And then the day of the event, we just had people read their translation. And it was really moving, I would say, to hear to see the wealth of languages that we speak and study at Reed, and then also to listen to why students chose the piece that they chose. It was a fabulous event. I should add, we invited the international students to participate as well. So we really had just a wonderful, rich variety of languages.
And some other activities that we have too that are worth noting is that we have several language houses at Reed, which are places one can live as a dorm if you're interested in a specific language. There's Spanish, French, Chinese, Russian, Arabic. But that it's also, there are tons of activities along those languages. So one of the wonderful parts about CompLit, but also about the various language departments too, is that we have a number of activities that are centered around those languages. And each year we have a native speaker or two, depending on the program, come from those countries to work with you as students, but also to offer certain activities. So there is a lot of opportunity for interaction with people along those lines. And I realized I forgot to mention one thing earlier. I have an 18-year-old who's also considering college right now, and I know it's really hard to figure this out and remember and know what it's going to look like. And I did want to mention to all of you that one of the things we've been looking for is something Reed has on its website. So if you go to the main Reed website, there's something called a major planner. You can just look in the little search bar up there, you can look at the major planner. And you can look at it for all majors for Reed. And this is something my son and I have been looking at a lot of for different schools. And what you can do, I would encourage you to look at the comparative literature major planner. I would also say look at the English major planner or anything else that you're interested in, because I think there's really no better way to imagine kind of what would your 4 years look like at a school. And what kind of classes might you have to take, and what are the requirements for the various majors. So that's something that's been useful, and I meant to mention that earlier. Yeah. And I know we want to give time to Sarah, so they wanted us to talk about one thing that we value about Reed, and so maybe Louie and I can do our one thing and then pass it off to Sarah. The one thing I would say that I really value about Reed is that we really get to know our students well. And so one thing that you'll find I think a lot of small liberal arts colleges, but particularly at Reed, is that what starts with the paper conferences. After every paper, you meet with a professor in Hum 110 for half an hour to talk about each paper, the 7 papers you hand in during the year. So starting with that and then moving forward, you're always going to be working closely with professors. So there's no time where you're just a number at Reed. There's no moment where people don't know who you are. And so if that's something you value, I'd say that's something I value as a professor here, and something that I think we do extremely well. So I'll pass it to Libby.
And I just wanted to, I'll say what I really love about Reed in a second, but just to go back to something that Anne said about the language houses and comparative literature. I just want to stress how well it works to have the resources of a department, a home department, and have your major be in comparative literature. So you really get to participate in both worlds. And my example here is in the Spanish house. We have, I think, 16 students living with 2 language scholars, one from Barcelona and one from Argentina. And our house advisor, so the upper class person who's in charge of the house, is a comparative literature major. So there's a really nice moving back and forth among the departments and comp lit. So you have a home base if you choose that. And as far as what I really love about Read, I think I agree with Anne. I think it's a community of, it's just a great intellectual community in which students and faculty participate. So, and I think it does go back to the Humanities 110 course, because we have all had this common experience, because many of your faculty members in the humanities also teach in Humanities 110. We get to know students from the first year through the 4th year, but we also are in conversation with our colleagues in a way that is really exciting and interesting. So we all hear each other lecture, we all have the opportunity to discuss with each other different intellectual problems. And for me, so for example, I'm working with a student this year that was in my as a senior writing a thesis, who was a student in my Hum 110 conference 4 years ago. And it's just really fun and interesting to see that growth over the 4 years, to really know somebody over the 4 years. People change in 4 years, so we get to know each other well. Okay, Sarah, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Both. I felt like I was learning some new things about comp lit, so that was great. So as I mentioned, I teach creative writing on the prose side of things, so fiction and creative nonfiction. Creative writing is not a major at Reed. It is housed within the English department. But an exciting thing is that as of next fall, creative writing is actually going to be a track within the English department. The way the English department is currently set up is there are 3 tracks within it. So I'll speak to creative writing first, and then I can tell you a little bit about the other tracks. So if a student chooses to follow a creative writing track within the English major, what that means is that in addition to other English major requirements, they need to take 4 upper level creative writing courses, at least 1 in a different genre from the others. So if you are primarily a fiction writer, you would still need to take a course in poetry, for example, or vice versa. And then what completing those additional courses in creative writing allows you to do is, when it comes time to write your thesis in your senior year, as every Reed student does, you will then have the opportunity to write a creative thesis. So you can write a collection of short stories or a novella or a collection of poetry through following this track and taking the required creative writing courses. And as I said, this is a new development, and I think one that is really going to benefit the students writing creative theses and give them a really strong grounding for doing that writing. The other 2 tracks within the English major, students can follow the foreign literature emphasis, which means that they ultimately will need to take at least 2 courses in a foreign literature not in translation. So that means 2 foreign literature courses in the original language. And presumably this means that they'll be taking that language up to the point at which they're then able to take the literature not in translation courses. Or a student might choose to take English with a cultural emphasis, and taking an English major with a cultural emphasis means that instead of taking those language classes throughout, a student will take our upper level humanities class, Hum 220, or another course that allows for some comparative cultural history. So each of those 2 tracks are sort of broadening the frame beyond simply looking at English literature. And students on the cultural track as well are required to take several classes in literature, not in English, but those can be in translation. So regardless of what track you take within English, you're still having the opportunity to look beyond as well. A little bit more about the English major in general. One of the exciting and I think somewhat unique things about the English major at Reed is that even from the introductory level courses at the 200 level, we don't have these big survey courses where you're learning about all of fiction that's ever been created or all of poetry that's ever been created. We're focusing in on the poetry that relates to early modern women. You're focusing on African-American playwrights. You're focusing on the American short story. So that you're really getting to dig deeply into a topic from the very beginning of your English study. And those topics become even more specialized as you move up to the 300 level courses. And then within creative writing, we offer a range of courses starting with introductory courses like Intro to Fiction, Intro to Poetry, and then have a greater level of specialization based on the faculty members' interests. So I have taught courses in the last couple of years, one on queer writing, one called Writing Resistance, one called Ambivalence, Failure, and Doubt. And those are exciting for me to teach because they allow me to explore aspects of my own writing practice that are compelling to me and that I want to explore further as well. And then I'm able to work with students to explore those themes and topics further. In my own writing, I write both short form and longer form fiction. I've published a novel a few years back from Tin House Press, based here in Portland, and I'm currently working on a collection of short stories. And I write creative nonfiction and criticism from time to time as well. Our other faculty member in creative writing, sorry, there's maybe a blender or a vacuum happening. I hope that's not too obtrusive. Is that okay?
You're fine.
So the other faculty member in creative writing is someone who specializes in fiction. This year we have visitor Jay Choi, and next year Samia Bashir will be back. They have both offered super interesting classes looking at poetry as a visual object, looking at multimedia poetries, looking at poetry as they relate to a sense of place. Again, sort of beginning with the initial genre and then expanding out to connect other topics and ideas to it. Additionally, we have a number of really exciting community-oriented opportunities in creative writing. Our Visiting Writer series brings 8 nationally recognized writers to campus over the course of the year to give a reading, sometimes to have a more intimate conversation with students or do class visits as well. And to me, this is one of the most exciting things about teaching at Reed, is to get to bring writers to campus who are writing now, have us read those works and talk about them in class, and then actually to have the writer there for students to engage with. I think it's a really exciting opportunity and has been really valuable to many students. We also have the Writing Salon, which might consist of a conversation with the author, might consist of different sort of community literary organizations coming in, and these are more informal gatherings with students. I've been helping to facilitate a queer and trans writing salon this year, and sometimes the students who come to these salons and visiting writers readings are people taking creative writing classes. Sometimes they're just people who are interested in contemporary literature, so that's really exciting as well. I think you know, there are people involved with creative writing at Reed who are English majors who are sort of going all in terms of their academic study. And then there are plenty of people in the courses who are STEM majors or social science majors or what have you, but who are sort of taking creative writing courses and participating in creative writing life at Reed, just as part of their overall academic experience. Let's see. And then I think what I value about Reed, I'll say, the really genuine intellectual curiosity and engagement that I encounter in students. I always think of this time, it was my first year teaching at Reed. It was, you know, a couple days before the start of classes, and a student who was going to be in my introductory fiction class came to my office. He just knocked on the door to see if I was there, and he just asked me what I'd been reading lately that interested me, and I asked him the same. And to have this conversation, to have my introduction to students at Reed be, you know, in this case, a sophomore student who was excited enough about literature to come and engage with a professor he hadn't yet met about it, and who was excited not only in engaging with literature, but engaging with professors in a way that went beyond simply talking about assignments and requirements and this kind of thing, that really went to that space of intellectual curiosity, is something I think Reed nurtures so well, and that's why I love teaching here.
Can I just add one more thing about the English department? Sarah was
Yeah,
truly magnificent, but the English department, as well as Reed in general, does have some funding opportunities for summer research for students. And so it might be worth mentioning that the English department in particular has something called the Eddings Grant, which is a really exciting opportunity to make proposals to work with professors, to do various research things. And I think that that's wonderful. But then in the larger college as well, we have a number of grants where professors have worked with students over the summer, and the students get a stipend. And I think it makes it relatively affordable to live in Portland. I did one last summer, and the student rented an apartment, and we met on a weekly basis. So I just wanted to mention that's another among the amazing list of things that Sarah mentioned. That's just one other thing that that occurred to me as you were talking.
Mm-hmm. While we're thinking about projects and funding, I'll mention too, we had a couple of students this year go to present their work, so a paper that they had written for a class. They went to a conference on film and literature at NYU. It was a graduate student conference. They were fourth year students, third year student and fourth year student, but their paper was accepted, and they applied for funding and received funding to be able to go to present their work at this conference. So that was a pretty exciting opportunity as well. I think, thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Anne. I think at this point, we're ready to answer some questions. And I have one that Miljan has forwarded to me about the types of jobs that CompLit grads end up doing. And as you can imagine, it's pretty broad. And I guess I would say that about a liberal arts college in general. You're not getting training here for a particular job. You know, we have a 3-2 engineering program. So if you want to be an engineer, you can certainly do that. But you're getting just a broad and well-rounded education, and then the opportunity to really dive deep into a particular area of interest. So it's hard to predict what people are going to do with this. I mean, the options are unlimited. I can say, because CompLit's so new, we're at the beginning of this. So some students go to graduate school. Some students teach. Certainly, that's a viable path. Interestingly, we have a film cluster, not necessarily in CompLit, but I would say in the literature departments in general, to the extent that last year we had a film panel and invited 3 recent grads to come back and talk about their work in the film industry. These are all students who had graduated within 10 years. One was an associate producer of Roma, of Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, was working in Mexico City and ended up working on that film. Another is an executive producer for Netflix, producing her own documentary films. And a third is an independent filmmaker whose first feature film was just featured in the Portland International Film Festival. So I would add that that's one of the fun things about being a faculty member, Reed, is seeing what you all end up doing. And it's all pretty interesting stuff. So it's, I think it can be a little unnerving because you're not exactly clear. It's not, what I really want to do is I want to, I don't know, be a business major and I'm going to work in a bank, or I'm going to be an investment banker. If you're major in whatever that would be, I don't even know, I suppose accounting or something, that career path is set. But at Reed, we have plenty of people who go on to be investment bankers, by the way, but they don't major in that, is my point. You're learning skills that are highly transferable, but they're not necessarily geared to just one job, right? So you're learning to write, you're learning to articulate ideas orally, you're learning to think deeply about things, you're learning to work with other people. And these are highly transferable, and Reedies end up being extremely successful, but not in a narrow, I'm going to have this job. So I hope that answers. If not, follow up and I'll try again.
So we have a good question here. And I'm going to ask 2 questions and have one of you take the first and another person take the second question. The first is, how does English differ from comparative literature? And the second question is, and there are a few questions about this, wanting more detail about creative writing. How many classes is usually the creative writing track? How does one, for all intents and purposes, declare that they're interested in creative writing? Do they work with their advisor? Is there something more formal? So a bit more about creative writing classes, and also compare and contrast comparative literature and English.
I can do the quick compare contrast and then turn it to Sarah. Does that work?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
great.
I would just say that, so comparative literature, really importantly, does not have a creative writing track. So if you want to do creative writing, you've got to do it by way of English if you want to do that as your major. But then secondarily, comparative literature is insistently a language that requires that you learn the foreign languages and that you engage with the literatures not in translation. I mean, you can engage with some of them in translation, but we have more requirements in terms of courses that you need to take not in translation. So comparative literature is both requiring that you have that ability in foreign languages, which you can acquire while you're here. You can acquire by way of, either by testing from high school, but also you can take classes while you're here, or you could do summer intensives. A number of students have done that. So we require every student to speak and learn one language outside of English. And as you heard from Sarah, there is a track in English where you wouldn't have to do that. Also, English is about English literature and American literature. And so most of their courses will focus on English and American literature, whereas comparative literature is open to the entire globe. So you can take classes and study works from a wide variety of traditions. And then the other thing I would say is that English does not have the ability to focus on a specific topic. You could incidentally do that. You could take courses where you're focused on a specific topic and try to make it work out. But in Comp Lit, every major is required to submit a proposal where you say, I'm going to study this. So if you wanted to do gender studies, you could do gender studies because you say, I'm going to take all of these courses across departments that deal with gender studies. And so Comp Lit gives you a little bit more flexibility along those lines, where you can choose a theme that you're really passionate about or an idea that you're passionate about. Now the rest is all Sarah's domain because I don't know anything about the rest of that.
And I'll reiterate that this creative writing track is brand new. It is just being instituted next year. So I'm learning it as well. So to have the creative writing track within English, you can do that. And I actually realized I misspoke earlier. So it's not that there are 3 tracks within the English major. There are 2 tracks, four tracks. There's traditional foreign literature emphasis, traditional cultural emphasis, and then creative writing track with a foreign literature emphasis, and creative writing track with a cultural emphasis. So even if you are moving towards writing that creative thesis, you still need to choose within the English major to either have that foreign literature emphasis or that cultural emphasis. But in addition to meeting the requirements for one of those 2 emphases, you also need to take 4 total creative writing courses, at least 1 in each genre, poetry or prose. And at least 3 of those need to be completed before your senior year. Because we ask that students not be, while they're writing a creative thesis, also be taking a creative writing course in that same genre, because it could result in some sort of double dipping in terms of your thesis work and your coursework. And you sort of declare that and figure it out as you're working towards declaring your major in the 2nd semester of your sophomore year. So I'm working with some advisees now who are interested, now that this opportunity is available, in being able to do that creative writing concentration. And so we're sort of looking at how many courses they've taken so far, how many they'll still need to take, and going from there.
Excellent. I just sent a question, Sarah, and
Yeah,
you can start off, maybe read the question, and if Anne and Libby have more to say about that, they're welcome.
Yeah, for sure. So the question is, I noticed that there are few classes in the English department open to first-year students, and I was wondering why that is. The primary reason for that is that Humanities 110 is really seen as a gateway course to further study in the humanities. And so the idea being that once students get that strong grounding in Hum 110, they can then move on to take English courses in their 2nd year and beyond. There are increasingly some English courses that students are eligible to take in the 2nd semester of their 1st year, and those are marked as such in the catalog. are courses that, have certain spots set aside for second semester, first year students, with the thought that students have already gotten some of that grounding in their first semester, some of that grounding through Hume, and can then move on to English study. I don't know if either of you want to add anything to that.
And I'll just jump in and let folks know we do have a Hume 110 roundtable tomorrow that's going to take place at 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I think that's 6 o'clock Eastern. So if you want to come and find out more about Hume 110, join us tomorrow. We'll have 3 other faculty members to talk a bit about that.
And can I just add one thing, that now that I know how hard it is to keep track of what every school does, at Reed traditionally people take, and tell me, Libby and Sarah, if you disagree, but most students would take 3 classes in their first semester and then 4 classes in their second semester. And 3, it seems remarkably low, I now realize, compared to a lot of other schools. But part of that is because Hume 110 counts for 1.5 classes. So Hume 110, because it's such a labor intensive class, most people only take 2 other classes in addition to Hume 110 in the first semester, and then 3 other classes in addition to Hume 110 in the spring. So as a result, Hume 110 ends up taking up a kind of central position in the fall semester, and allows you to get this parade of professors before you, because you have a number of different professors lecturing, so you get to see all the different professors. So really that common experience takes a lot of your energy in the first year. There's room to take the other classes, as Sarah mentioned, but I would just note that I think most people are not, I guess I didn't know that there are schools where some people take like 5 classes per semester as a matter of course, and it doesn't work that way at Reed. It's usually 3 or 4 classes per semester.
I think that's a really good point, Anne, because, and it's an important difference from other places. Students come in and you see all sorts of courses that you want to take, and I guess you'll be able to, over the 4 years, you'll have lots of space to be able to explore. But for that first semester and recognizing that it's a transition and wanting people to get situated and feel comfortable on campus and in Portland and get used to the workload, which is hefty, that's really good advice. It's fine. Hume 110, the great thing about Hume 110 is you're in a course with all your classmates, all the first year class. And that allows for a really interesting sharing of ideas. But as Milian said, they're talking about that tomorrow. So I'll leave it at that.
Anne, I just shot you a question.
Yeah, and I don't know that I know the answer to it. I'll read the question though. It said, to what extent does Reed's linguistics major overlap with the English and Comp Lit majors? And I think the answer, correct me if I'm wrong, colleagues, is largely not at all. So the linguistics major does require second year proficiency in a foreign language. So that's an overlap. That would be a way in which Comp Lit majors and some English majors would also have that overlap. But then after that, the linguistics major follows, I believe, and I again encourage you all, look at the major planners. They're so great because they give you such a sense of what's required. In the linguistics major, I believe they have both a sociolinguistics component as well as what would be more sort of the theoretical linguistics component. None of the literature majors require that. The difference is Comp Lit could, theoretically, your allied field could be linguistics. So you could say you want to do Comp Lit with linguistics, and certainly that would be a possibility. We have a lot of students who come who are saying, I might want to be a linguistics major. I might want to be a foreign literature major. I might want to be a Comp Lit major. I might want to be an English major. That's a really common situation. So let me tell you, it works out just fine. So what happens, and I just was advising someone moments ago about this very question, where she had just said, she decided to be Comp Lit in the end and not linguistics, but she's going to do linguistics as her allied field. And so she thinks, she's still thinking, but so what she's thinking about is, how does linguistics relate to comparative literature? So what I would say is, if you're worried about, do I need to track myself into a major early on at Reed? I believe the only major that you kind of really need to know that you're going to do, but even then you don't have to know, is some sort of version of physics, or there might be a couple other that are really requirement heavy where you want to start with the requirements early. But for most cases at Reed, you can test around a lot of different majors. You can try out a lot of different things, and you don't have to absolutely commit until fall of your junior year. Well, actually spring of your sophomore year, let's say. But what we can do as advisors is we can help you to say, okay, I'm interested in both. Can I take some classes in both? And for the vast majority of the people I advise, that works out just great. And what it does is it cross-fertilizes their thinking. They're able to kind of think about the relationships between the structure of language and the manner in which it's presented in literature. And those kinds, that's all good. So we're, as a small liberal arts college, we are entirely in favor of that kind of interdisciplinarity. But in terms of strictly speaking, the overlap between the majors, I actually don't think there's much except for the language proficiency requirement in linguistics. And we love linguistics students because they're very detailed and neurotic about language.
And I can add that I have a student who's taken a couple of classes with me who's a linguistics major with creative writing as her allied field. And while I haven't necessarily seen the direct result of what that means in terms of the intersections of the two, it's just another way that we have someone in the classroom who's bringing all the knowledge that she has being a linguistics major, and that to have students come to the table with their own particular knowledges and be able to share those with the room, I think is a really exciting aspect of being at a smaller college where students are able to take courses outside of their major as well.
I think that's worth stressing, that in your all of your classes, you're going to have people in your home area of study. So if you're in other complet majors, other literature majors, other English majors, but then you might have biology majors or people from psychology or people from the arts. And that kind of cross-pollination really makes for interesting conversations. We really welcome that.
Okay, so Libby, I have a question I'm going to ask you, and actually I'm going to ask all three of you because I think this is really interesting. I'd love to hear your answer for this. Is there a moment in your teaching that could have only happened at Reed?
That's a thoughtful question, so I'm going to think for a minute.
I've got an answer.
Okay.
My answer is on my birthday, I know it was my birthday. It doesn't matter that it was my birthday, like 10 years ago, a professor didn't show up for Humanities 110 lecture. He was sick or something. I had a kid who was sick and he didn't show up. And we were debating what to do. And we said, well, why don't we just all go down there? So 25 of us went down to the front of the lecture hall and we tried to just have a conversation with the faculty and the students. It was incredible. There were 400 people in the lecture hall. And I kid you not, it was one of the best conversations we had ever had about Augustine's Confessions or something like that, where we all just rose to the moment. And I was just amazed watching my colleagues, everybody talking. I was like, this is how it is. You can have a conversation with 425 people. And everybody was super into it. So that's what sprung to mind for me. Hopefully that gave you guys time to think.
It did. Thank you, Anne. Okay, so here's mine. I study contemporary Spanish literature, but I have the tremendous pleasure of teaching Don Quixote. And so anybody who knows Don Quixote knows that it was written in the 17th century. So here I am with the tremendous, in my opinion, tremendous good fortune of teaching something out of my field that I absolutely love teaching. And it's something that I've taught since I've come to Reed. It's called Don Quixote, a Narrative Theory. So it really is Don Quixote in the 20th century. But last week, actually, in the middle of the coronavirus, we're having our class discussion via Zoom. And it was such a rich conversation that in the middle of it, I had to think, again, this is not something that's happened to me only once over my years, but it was the first time in this context. I would do this for free. Nobody needs to pay me to sit around and talk about Don Quixote with a bunch of really smart, committed students. This is so pleasurable that this is well outside of being a job. And that happened in the anonymity of the Zoom format is really I think it really says a lot about the students who are sticking with it and holding it together and come to the Zoom meeting prepared and ready to go.
The first thing that came to mind for me is in my first year at Reed, when my son was born 5 years ago, I took a couple weeks off during the semester. I was still sort of getting used to things, and I had asked some people to potentially fill in, but there was a day where I didn't have anyone. And so I asked my students to try to meet without me and to, do these things and have this discussion. And I thought to myself, having taught at a number of institutions before, maybe a handful of them will show up. We'll see what happens. And every single student showed up on a day that I wasn't there. And had the conversation that I asked them to have and engage with the material, as I heard back from their report back. And the fact that students' investment in the material, and I believe that they were there because they wanted to talk about this material and they wanted to share their work with each other. And they wanted to continue to build that community they had tried to build with each other, regardless of whether or not I was there. Just really impressed me. And I don't think I've taught anywhere else where I imagine that would happen in the same way.
Thanks so much. Let's see. So folks are really curious about the types of research that you can do in English, creative writing, and comp lit. Can each of you give one or two examples of research that you're aware of or that your students have done in the past?
Last year, a comp lit major wrote about a really interesting thesis about migration poetry and was interested in comparing poetry written about migration over water and poetry written about migration through land. It was an interesting project. There's one. Anne, you want to take one?
Yeah, sure. I would give, so this year I'm working with a student who is trying to fill the gap in studying of French Chinese writing. There's very little work has been done on French Chinese work, and she's writing on 3 Franco-Chinois novels and talking about how they engage with questions of cultural exchange and looking at how cultural exchange can occur actually through aesthetic means. And so she's looking at the negative stuff, but she's also looking at sort of the positive versions of cultural exchange. So that's really interesting. And then the project I did with the student last summer, I would just add that as well as an example. We did it on shock in literature and film and music. And so we were just looking at moments of shock and trying to describe what shock is like and how shock manifests itself in literature. But it was most interesting for me because I had never really studied opera that much, and she was teaching me all about opera and how we located moments of shock in opera, and that was really cool.
Cool. In terms of English, I know right now of a student for their thesis who's writing about comedy and performance, and I know I was looking at Richard Pryor and Hannah Gadsby and thinking through sort of comedy and narratives of shame and reclamation of identity. Also a student right now who's writing about looking at novels by Philip Roth and then the contemporary writer Nicole Krauss, and looking at those 2 novels in conversation with each other, thinking about Jewish identity, among other things. On the creative writing side, a student right now is doing a creative nonfiction thesis where she is thinking about Latinx identity and feminism and queer identity and sort of establishing this sort of personal canon of forebears to bring to bear on the writing that she's doing about her own family and identity. On the creative writing side of things, if one is writing a creative thesis, one is largely focusing on producing their own creative work, but they do also produce sort of a short critical afterword that follows the creative project where they're thinking about their influences and the different themes that have informed their writing, and they're doing research to support that as well.
Excellent. So I've got 2 final questions for you all. This next one is about double majoring, and as our faculty know, very few students double major at Reed, primarily because there's 2 theses and the number of classes that a student has to take on. But can you talk about how we talk about interest in 2 different programs? I think that might be more helpful. And say that this is a student that's thinking about music, specifically voice opera and English. How might you advise them?
That's a good project for comparative literature, right? Because then you would do the track 2, you would study literature and study music. So with the slight changes that music performance wouldn't necessarily count within comparative literature, within that track 2, we would ask that you would take music history, music theory courses and study more analytically the study of music. But it would be wonderfully compatible with your interest in performance. So that would be one way to go about it. The other is that we're starting to add minors at Reed, and I think it's pretty exciting. So all of a sudden, for the first time this year, we have a Spanish minor. And this allows students who want to be, I don't know, I've got all sorts of people in my Don Quixote class now who are minors in Spanish, but are majoring in psychology, for example. And so we're asking them to take 4 courses in Spanish department for the minor. And this allows them to develop really strong proficiency in another area, another field. And it's great. It's wonderfully practical. It combines kind of a practical element with allowing you to explore your interests and not having to choose just one and be defined by one thing. I'll add, in Comp Lit, you can't minor in your allied field because that's one of your major requirements, right? So that's a question that I've had a lot of this year. But the fact of the matter is you've almost got the minor by majoring in comparative literature, if you understand what I mean, right? Because you're working in that other field, it's as though you have a minor, and you can explain that to people who are interested after graduation, be it for work or for graduate school or whatever. Did I get that, Miljan? Is that what you had in mind?
It's yours, Libby. Thanks so much.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think that was comprehensive. Other than lots of people study lots of things, and the minor is the way to do it, or one of these ad hoc majors, one of these majors like Comp Lit. We have a whole bunch of majors that combine things. So I don't know if there's one that combines music with other things, but again, you could look in the list of majors that Reed and see.
And again, we have a music session coming up later this week. So visit the Virtual Visits website, and it'll give you some more information about that particular session. And we have our last question, and maybe Anne, you could start off with this one.
Sure. The question is, what would be the typical course load? I imagine that means workload in one of these classes. Would the professors say the classes are structured more Socratically, or the teachers aim to lecture on certain works of literature? I hate lecturing, so I'll start with that. No, I can't lecture for hours. I would bore myself to sleep. My classes, and I think most of the classes in humanities, are taught in the so-called Socratic method. So it's question and answer. We know we've succeeded, as I think we have in the class I'm teaching right now. We're on Sartre, and I try to get a word in edgewise, but I often don't succeed because the students are really taking it. They're driving the bus. We try to, I give little mini lectures sometimes when they need context. I try to kind of push things back to where we want to go, but for the most part, the classes are structured quite Socratically, and the conference method is at the core of Hume 110. So Hume 110 is all about the conference method, or the Socratic method, where it's a really discussion based. In terms of workload, I'd say the workload is fairly high. I don't know how I would compare it. We'll read 10 plays a semester or something in a theater class. So I don't know that we can compare it across things. You'll have, a lot of times you'll have 50 to 100 pages of reading, per class, but it depends on how often the class meets, et cetera. So I don't think there's an easy way for me to translate the workload. The main thing that I would say about Reed students is that they take the work very seriously. And so the beauty of it is that you come to class and people have done the reading. And so it's not, what you might have experienced in some other contexts where there's a certain amount of baloney spouting forth from people's mouths. There sometimes is that, but very often people are quite well prepared. So I would almost say quality over quantity, that even if there's less reading, people will do a really good job with it. And so a lot of times you can have very high level conversations because people are just really well prepared. That takes a certain amount of work. People take it seriously. People do their homework. And that's part of, I think, the Reed ethos. Hopefully that if you applied to Reed, hopefully you already knew that's not surprising to you.
I'll just add that my very first course at Reed, about halfway through the semester, it was office hours of all things, and a very polite student was there. How are things going? Fine. We chit-chatted a while, and I just said, well, what's on your mind? He said, well, Libby, the course is super interesting, but we can do more work. I said, what? And this is a course I had taught at another university. And so this person was kind of deputized by the rest of the conference to come and tell me to let's up it a little bit. So it wasn't that there was anything wrong. It's just they were used to doing more. And so I added more, of course. And it's a don't look back. So, you know, and I'll say that over the course of 4 years, you know, we're people, all of us are people, and you have your ups and downs. And I think faculty understand that. So Anna is exactly right. It's a wonderful thing about teaching. People are responsible, and they prepare, and they're ready to go, and they're interested. And so you never have to worry about motivating people to work. But I do think we recognize that folks have these ups and downs, and we're, you know, most people are really interested and want to be sensitive to that and to help you out when that happens as well.
Mm-hmm.
If that, colleagues, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We know your people.
I'll add to that with creative writing. The courses I teach are workshop style courses. So much of the time we're spending having students bring their work and share it with their peers. And that happens in a staggered way throughout the semester. So there really, you know, might be the time when you're working a lot to submit your short story to the group. And then the rest of the time you're commenting on each other's work, but don't have that particular major goal. And I think that's something else that's really wonderful about teaching at Reed is giving students the opportunity to, and also knowing they can handle the need then to like structure their time on their own a little bit, and knowing, oh, this is a good date for me to sign up for because I have these other things going on, or I don't have these other things going on at this time. And in the downtime when I'm not working towards my story, I'm going to be thinking about revision, or I'm going to be really focusing on my peers' work. And to know that even with those ups and downs, students are able to sort of think about the big picture of the semester. I think that's been really great to work with too.
So I'm going to make this last question, the real last question, fun and short. Sarah, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first. I want to know either a poem or a work of literature that you think exemplifies the best qualities of Reed.
The best qualities of literature?
Or
Yeah.
a piece of literature, or a poem.
Okay. Yeah.
A writing piece that exemplifies the best about Reed.
With the best about Reed, you said?
Right.
Oh, man.
Okay, I got one while you think, Sarah.
Okay.
If I can jump in. I'm sorry, I've got Don Quixote on the brain. But I always thought this would be a great t-shirt. So at the beginning, the main character reads too much, and he begins to believe what he reads, and he becomes a knight errant. And the line is this: and so, from too much reading and too little sleep, his brains dried up, and he lost his wits. I always thought this would be a great t-shirt for our end of the year celebration at Ren Fair. Nobody's ever taken me up on it, but maybe when you guys come, you can, you know, a little Picasso, Don Quixote on the front, and then the line from the text on the back. That's what we share. We work hard and we enjoy what we're doing. And some people might think that's a little bit crazy. I just think it's great fun. Okay, Sarah, did I give you time?
Yeah, okay. You know, the first book that came to mind, and I think it's just because it's one of my favorite books, is James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. And I thought of that novel because of the ways it feels both sort of steeped in tradition and forward-looking at the same time. You know, taking up certain tropes of sentimentality or melodrama, while also in its subject matter, dealing with a sort of metaphorically interracial queer romance in Paris, taking up issues of identity that were sort of transgressive for the time. And I think that I really see that at Reed too, like a real valuing of tradition while also a real investment in innovation.
And I'll just quickly add that Montaigne's essays are what came to my mind, where he wrote these are his stream of consciousness essays that he wrote in the 16th century, where he refused to edit because he didn't want to undo his past self. And so this attitude of trying and trying and trying again and preserving our efforts as we try, and that the kind of way we hone ourselves at Reed through the art of trying, through essay in French, to try. So that's what I would say.
That was lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I guess I get to sign off, and just really would like to thank you all for joining us in faculty office hours, and good luck as you make these decisions, and feel free to be in touch if you have further questions.
Absolutely. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye, everyone.